The stars looked peaceful through the observation deck windows of the research ship Endeavour. Captain Jake Martinez stood with his coffee cup and watched the distant suns shine like tiny diamonds against the black of space. His ship carried 200 people deep into unexplored territory near the Kepler system. They were scientists and engineers looking for new minerals and resources that Earth needed for its growing colonies. Lisa Harper worked in the engine room 3 decks below. She was the chief engineer and knew every bolt and wire in the ship. The Endeavour was not built for fighting. It had basic shields and one small defense gun that could barely stop Space Orcs. Lisa often told Jake they needed better weapons out here in unknown space, but Earth Command said the mission was safe. No alien life had ever been found this far from home. Danny Rodriguez sat at his communication station on the bridge. He spoke 7 languages and could decode almost any signal pattern. His job was to listen for any signs of intelligent life while the science teams did their work. For 3 months, he had heard nothing but the normal sounds of space and distant star radiation. Dr. Susan Blake spent her days in the medical bay and the science labs. She studied alien plants and microbes the exploration teams brought back from nearby planets. Most were harmless, but she always stayed careful. Her job was to make sure nothing dangerous got brought aboard that could hurt the crew. The Endeavour moved slowly through the asteroid fields around Kepler 442. The mining teams worked outside in their small ships, collecting rock samples and rare metals. Everything seemed normal and quiet, just like every other day on their long mission. Jake finished his coffee and walked to the bridge. Danny looked up from his station with a worried face. Strange signals were coming from somewhere nearby, but they did not match any known patterns. The sounds were too organized to be natural, but too alien to be human. Before Jake could ask questions, the ship's alarms began screaming. Lisa's voice came over the speakers from the engine room, telling everyone that massive energy signatures were appearing all around them. Ships were coming out of hyperspace, and they were huge. The first alien vessel appeared like a dark mountain against the stars. It was 10 times bigger than the Endeavour and covered in weapons that glowed with dangerous energy. More ships followed, surrounding the human vessel in a perfect circle. Their design looked like nothing humans had ever built, with curved edges and strange symbols covering their hulls. Jake ordered Danny to send a peaceful greeting message, but the aliens did not respond with words. Instead, they fired some kind of energy beam that passed through the Endeavour's shields like they were made of paper. Every system on the ship stopped working except for basic life support. The humans were helpless and trapped. The alien ships moved closer, and Jake could see movement behind their transparent sections. The creatures inside were tall and thin, with scaled skin that looked green and gold under their ship's lights. They had long arms and faces that reminded him of Earth's ancient reptiles. But these beings clearly had intelligence and technology far beyond human capability. Lisa tried to restart the engines, but the alien beam had somehow frozen all their equipment. The mining teams outside were caught in the same energy field, their small ships floating helplessly in space. 200 humans sat in the dark, waiting to see what these aliens wanted. The largest alien ship opened like a flower, revealing a massive bay filled with smaller craft. These moved toward the Endeavour and the mining ships, clearly planning to bring the humans aboard. Jake ordered his crew to prepare for boarding, but their weapons were as useless as everything else. The alien boarding craft attached to the Endeavour with sounds of metal grinding against metal. Strange gas began flowing through the ship's air system, making everyone feel sleepy and weak. Jake tried to fight the feeling, but his vision became blurry and his legs would not hold him up anymore. The last thing Jake saw before the darkness took him was alien soldiers entering the bridge. They were even taller than he had thought, maybe 8 feet high, with yellow eyes that showed no emotion. Their equipment was advanced beyond anything humans had dreamed of building. They looked at the unconscious humans like farmers might look at cattle they were planning to buy. Dr. Susan Blake woke up first in what appeared to be a holding cell. The walls were made of some kind of metal that glowed softly with blue light. Other crew members lay around her, still unconscious from the alien gas. Through a transparent barrier, she could see similar cells holding the rest of the Endeavor's crew and the mining teams. The aliens who had captured them moved through the corridors outside. Susan watched them carefully, trying to understand what they wanted. They seemed to be sorting the humans into different groups, pointing at some and making notes on devices that floated in the air beside them. When Jake finally woke up, he found himself separated from most of his crew. Only about 20 other people were in his section, mostly the ship's security team and some of the stronger crew members. Lisa was somewhere else, probably grouped with the other technical people. Danny and Susan were also gone, taken to different parts of the alien ship. An alien soldier approached Jake's cell and looked at him with those cold yellow eyes. It spoke in a voice that sounded like grinding stone, but somehow Jake understood the meaning in his mind. The creature was evaluating him, deciding what he might be useful for and whatever plans these aliens had for humanity. 6 months had passed since the aliens took the humans from the Endeavor. Jake Martinez now stood in a fighting arena on a planet called Corvash Prime, surrounded by thousands of alien spectators who screamed for blood. The Corthony Empire, as he had learned these reptilian creatures were called, used captured beings for entertainment in gladiatorial combat. The arena floor was covered in sand that had turned red from the blood of countless fighters who had died here. Jake wore simple leather armor and carried a metal sword that felt heavy in his hands. He was not a soldier by training, but 6 months of fighting for his life had taught him skills he never knew he possessed. His opponent today was a creature from another world, something that looked like a giant insect with razor-sharp claws and acid that dripped from its mouth. The alien crowd cheered as the beast charged toward Jake, its 6 legs moving faster than any human could run. Jake did not try to match the creature's speed or strength. Instead, he used his mind, watching how it moved and looking for patterns in its attacks. When the beast lunged at him with its claws, Jake rolled to the side and struck at its leg joint with his sword. The creature screamed and stumbled, green blood flowing from the wound. The Corthony in the audience seemed surprised. Most fighters tried to meet their opponents head-on with brute force. Jake's strategy of using intelligence and patience was something they had not seen before. He continued to dodge and strike at weak points until the insect creature finally collapsed from blood loss. Far away on Nexus Station, Lisa Harper worked in the deuterium refineries where captured beings processed fuel for Corthony ships. The aliens had put her in charge of maintaining the mining equipment because of her engineering knowledge. They did not realize she was also studying their technology every chance she got. The Corthony machines were more advanced than human equipment, but they followed similar principles. Lisa discovered that their power systems had a critical weakness in their energy distribution networks. If someone knew exactly where to strike, they could cause massive system failures. She worked alongside other enslaved beings from different worlds. There was Zephyr, a crystalline creature whose people had been conquered 50 years ago, and Korik, a furry humanoid whose engineering skills matched her own. Together, they began planning ways to sabotage the station's operations. Lisa had to be careful not to show too much interest in the alien technology. The Corthony guards watched everyone closely, and slaves who seemed too curious often disappeared. But her position as equipment supervisor gave her access to areas other prisoners never saw. Danny Rodriguez found himself in the communication centers of the Corthony fleet, translating messages between different alien species. His gift for languages made him valuable to his captors, who needed to coordinate with many different conquered civilizations across their empire. While working at his translation station, Danny secretly memorized fleet movement patterns and military protocols. He developed a code based on old Earth radio frequencies that he used to hide information in routine translation reports. The Korthani never suspected that their human translator was gathering intelligence about their operations. Danny learned that humans were scattered across dozens of star systems to prevent organized resistance. The aliens had made this decision after studying human military history and deciding that humans work too well together when grouped in large numbers. What the Korthani did not understand was that humans could adapt to any situation. Dr. Susan Blake worked in alien hospitals, treating wounded Korthani soldiers and other species that served the Empire. Her medical knowledge proved useful because many alien biologies were similar to human anatomy in basic ways. The Korthani began to respect her skills and gave her more freedom to move around their facilities. During her medical work, Susan made an important discovery. Human blood contained compounds that were toxic to several alien species, including the Korthani themselves. In small amounts, these compounds caused sickness and weakness. In larger doses, they could be deadly. Susan also learned that human endurance was far superior to most galactic species. While the Korthani were stronger individually, they tired quickly during physical activity. Humans could work or fight for much longer periods without rest, something their captors had not expected. She began secretly collecting samples of human blood and other biological materials, storing them in medical containers that the aliens ignored. If the opportunity ever came to fight back, these materials could become weapons. Jake continued winning fights in the arena, developing a reputation among the Korthani nobles who attended the games. They called him the thinking fighter because of his unusual tactics that relied on strategy rather than raw power. Other enslaved fighters began asking him for advice. The arena held beings from many different worlds, all captured by the Korthani Empire and forced to fight for entertainment. Jake started organizing them into teams that worked together instead of fighting as individuals. The alien audience loved the new team battles, not knowing they were watching the beginning of organized resistance. Among Jake's gladiator allies was Thrak, a powerful warrior from a world of desert fighters, and Ela, a quick assassin whose people had been wiped out by the Korthani years ago. They learned to fight in formation, protecting each other's weaknesses and combining their different abilities. The Korthani guards noticed that the human seemed to have natural leadership abilities, but they thought this made the games more entertaining. They did not realize that Jake was building a network of fighters loyal to him personally, beings who would follow his orders when the time came to escape. Lisa's engineering team made their first strike against the Korthani when they sabotaged 3 mining machines on the same day. The machines broke down in ways that looked like normal mechanical failures, but the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. The station's productivity dropped by 30% overnight. The Korthani supervisors were angry but could not prove sabotage. They increased security, but Lisa's team had already learned the guard schedules and knew how to work around the new restrictions. Other enslaved engineers began copying their methods on different stations across the system. Danny established contact with human slaves in other locations by hiding coded messages in routine communications. He learned that similar acts of resistance were happening throughout Korthani space. The aliens had underestimated human ability to adapt and organize under any conditions. Susan Blake treated more Korthani soldiers and learned about their military structure and weaknesses. She discovered that their command system was rigid and did not handle unexpected situations well. The Korthani expected conquered species to behave in predictable ways based on their past experience. The 4 humans from the Endeavor had become leaders among their fellow slaves, each developing skills and knowledge that would be crucial for what was coming. The Korthani thought they had scattered the humans to prevent trouble, but instead they had created 4 separate centers of resistance that were growing stronger every day. 1 year had passed since the capture, and Danny Rodriguez finally managed to establish secret communication between the scattered human survivors. Using his position in the Korthani communication network, he created a hidden channel that bounced signals between different star systems without detection. The first message Jake received in his gladiator cell was simple but powerful. Lisa was alive and working on Nexus Station. Susan was treating patients in a military hospital 3 systems away. Danny himself was coordinating fleet communications on the command ship. All 4 were not just surviving but learning everything they could about their captors. Jake shared the news with his gladiator team during their rest period. Thrak and Yila were amazed that humans could maintain contact across such vast distances while enslaved. Most species lost hope quickly after capture, but humans seemed to grow more determined the longer they were held prisoner. The arena had become Jake's training ground in more ways than the Korthani realized. Every fight taught him something new about alien biology, combat tactics, and crowd psychology. He learned that different species had different fighting styles based on their home, world conditions, and natural abilities. More importantly, Jake discovered that he had a gift for inspiring others to fight beyond their normal limits. Enslaved fighters who had given up hope began training harder after talking with him. Species that had been traditional enemies started working together under his leadership. Lisa received Danny's message while working on a power distribution panel deep in Nexus Station. The coded signal told her that resistance cells were forming throughout Korthani space, and she needed to prepare her engineering team for coordinated action. Her partnership with Zephyr and Korik had grown into a network of technical specialists from a dozen different worlds. Each species brought unique knowledge about technology, materials, and engineering principles. Combined with human creativity and leadership, they were developing innovations the Korthani had never seen. Lisa's team had mapped every critical system on Nexus Station and identified the points where maximum damage could be caused with minimum risk. They had also learned to create tools and weapons from scrap materials, skills that would be essential when the time came to fight openly. The Korthani supervisors remained unaware of the growing resistance. They saw productivity improvements as different species learned to work together, not knowing that cooperation was being organized by humans who understood how to unite former enemies against a common threat. Dr. Susan Blake used her medical access to study Korthani military personnel and their equipment. She learned that their armor had gaps at the joints that human-sized fighters could exploit. Their weapons were powerful but required both hands to operate effectively, making them vulnerable to close combat. Susan's research into biological warfare had advanced significantly. She had identified 17 different compounds in human blood and tissue that were toxic to various alien species. More importantly, she had found ways to concentrate these compounds into more potent forms using medical equipment. The hospital where Susan worked treated soldiers from many different campaigns across the Korthani Empire. From their injuries and medical records, she learned about weapons, tactics, and the locations of major military installations, information that would be crucial for any large-scale resistance effort. Danny's position in fleet communications gave him access to shipping schedules, supply routes, and military deployments across multiple star systems. He learned that the Korthani Empire was vast but not as strong as it appeared. Much of their military was spread thin across occupied territories, and their logistics networks had predictable patterns. The breakthrough came when Danny intercepted orders for a major gladiatorial championship on Corvash Prime. High-ranking Korthani officials from across the empire would attend, including military commanders and political leaders. It would be the perfect opportunity for a coordinated strike. Danny sent coded messages to Jake, Lisa, and Susan, outlining a plan that would require precise timing and enormous risk. The Gladiator Championship would provide cover for the first open rebellion, while simultaneous sabotage strikes would cripple Korthani infrastructure across multiple systems. Jake received the plan during his preparation for the championship matches. The timing was perfect because he had built relationships with fighters from many different worlds, and several of them were scheduled to compete in the same games. His gladiator network could strike at the heart of Korthani leadership while the Empire's attention was focused on entertainment. The plan required Jake's team to not just escape from the arena, but to capture or kill as many high-ranking officials as possible during the chaos. It was a suicide mission by any reasonable calculation, but Jake knew that sometimes the impossible was the only option worth attempting. Lisa's part of the plan involved shutting down power grids across 3 major installations simultaneously. Her engineering teams had spent months preparing for this moment, building hidden devices that could overload Korthani energy systems from within. The sabotage would cut communications and strand enemy fleets during the crucial first hours of rebellion. The challenge was coordinating the timing across different star systems without alerting Korthani security. Lisa had to trust that Danny's communication network would deliver the activation signals at exactly the right moment, while hoping that her teams were ready to act when the time came. Dr. Susan Blake's role was perhaps the most dangerous of all. She needed to position herself where she could distribute biological weapons to human fighters while providing medical support during the battle. Her location at the military hospital put her at the center of Korthani defensive operations. Susan had prepared concentrated doses of human-derived toxins that could be delivered through the alien ventilation systems or directly injected into enemy soldiers. She had also trained other human medical personnel in basic combat medicine, preparing them to treat wounded rebels during the fighting. The night before the championship, Jake stood in his cell and looked through the small window at the alien city beyond the arena. Thousands of Korthani civilians moved through the streets, unaware that their empire was about to face its first serious challenge in centuries. Jake thought about his crew aboard the Endeavor, wondering how many were still alive and scattered across the galaxy. The 4 of them had become symbols of resistance, proof that humans could adapt and survive under any conditions. Tomorrow would determine whether that survival could become victory. Lisa made final adjustments to her sabotage devices while her alien teammates watched nervously. They understood that this rebellion might fail and result in their deaths, but they also knew it might be their only chance for freedom. The human engineer had given them hope that even the mighty Korthani Empire could be defeated. Danny sat at his communication station, monitoring fleet positions and preparing to send the activation signals that would begin the largest slave revolt in galactic history. His hands were steady as he worked, but his mind raced with calculations and contingency plans. Dr. Susan Blake checked her biological weapons one final time, then hidden them in medical supply containers that would not be searched by security. She had said goodbye to the patients she could not save, knowing that tomorrow's actions would either free them all or doom them to a worse fate than slavery. The championship games began with spectacular ceremonies that filled the arena with 50,000 Korthani spectators. Jake stood with his gladiator team in the preparation chambers, listening to the roars of the crowd above. Today's matches would feature the Empire's most celebrated fighters, including several humans who had gained fame through their unusual tactics. The Korthani officials sat in their luxury boxes, displaying their wealth and power to the gathered masses. Military commanders wore their finest armor, while political leaders showed off expensive robes made from materials taken from conquered worlds. They had no idea that many of the fighters below were planning their deaths. Jake's first match was against a team of armored warriors from the Centauri system. The aliens were bigger and stronger, but Jake's mixed species team had trained for months to fight as a coordinated unit. When the battle began, they moved like parts of a single organism, each fighter protecting the others while striking at enemy weak points. The crowd cheered as Jake's team systematically defeated their opponents without losing a single member. The Corthony spectators loved watching tactical brilliance overcome brute force, not knowing they were seeing a preview of their own military's future defeats. 3 systems away, Lisa Harper received Danny's activation signal through the hidden communication network. She looked at Zephyr and Korik, then activated the sabotage devices her team had spent months building. The power grid on Nexus Station began failing in carefully planned cascades that looked like random system errors. The Corthony supervisors rushed to control stations as mining equipment shut down across the facility. Emergency power activated, but Lisa's team had sabotaged those systems too. Within minutes, the entire station was running on backup batteries that would last only a few hours. Similar power failures began occurring on 2 other major installations. As Lisa's network of engineers executed their coordinated strikes, the Corthony military found their communications disrupted and their defensive systems offline just as reports of gladiator revolts began reaching command centers. Back in the arena, Jake's second match was interrupted when explosions rocked the facility's power systems. The lights flickered and died, plunging the massive stadium into darkness except for emergency illumination. Jake had been waiting for this signal, and he immediately shouted orders to his allied fighters, the Gladiator. Revolt began with shocking violence as enslaved fighters turned on their guards instead of each other. Jake led his team toward the luxury boxes where Corthony officials sat in confused terror. Most had never seen real combat and had no idea how to respond to organized resistance. Thrak and Yila cleared a path through the panicking guards, while Jake targeted the military commanders who might organize an effective response. The first Corthony general died before he could draw his weapon, Jake's blade finding the gap in his ceremonial armor with surgical precision. The arena erupted into chaos as thousands of enslaved fighters realized they outnumbered their captors by more than 10 to 1. Species that had been enemies for generations united against their common oppressors, fighting with a coordination that amazed even Jake. Dr. Susan Blake heard the emergency alarms in her hospital and knew the revolt had begun. She quickly distributed her biological weapons to human staff members, then began releasing concentrated toxins into the ventilation systems. Within minutes, Corthony soldiers throughout the facility were collapsing from respiratory failure and organ damage. The aliens had never encountered biological warfare designed specifically to target their physiology. Their medical knowledge could not explain why their own air was becoming poisonous, and panic spread faster than the toxins themselves. Susan organized the human medical staff into combat units, using their knowledge of alien anatomy to strike at vital points with improvised weapons. The hospital's supply of surgical instruments became a deadly arsenal in the hands of people who understood exactly how to use them. Danny Rodriguez watched his communication screens as reports of successful revolts flooded in from across the empire. The coordinated strikes were working better than anyone had dared hope, with power failures and biological attacks crippling Corthony responses before they could organize. The alien fleet commanders tried to coordinate with ground forces, but their communication networks had been compromised by the same human who had been translating their messages for months. Danny fed them false information while routing real intelligence to the rebel forces, creating confusion that multiplied the effectiveness of every attack. Jake fought his way to the arena's control center, where he could access the facilities' communication systems. He broadcast a message that reached every enslaved being in the Korthani Empire, telling them that the time for freedom had come, and that humans would lead any who chose to follow. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Slave revolts erupted on hundreds of worlds as beings who had given up hope realized that successful resistance was possible. The message spread through secret networks that had been building for months, turning isolated uprisings into a coordinated revolution. Lisa's engineering teams began the second phase of their plan, taking control of the stations they had sabotaged. With the power systems under their command, they could selectively restore functions that served their purposes while keeping enemy communications and weapons offline. The captured facilities became bases for expanding the rebellion. Lisa's technical knowledge allowed her teams to reprogram Korthani manufacturing systems, converting them from tools of oppression into weapons factories for the resistance. The Korthani High Command finally grasped the scope of the crisis when reports arrived from 17 different star systems simultaneously. This was not a random outbreak of violence, but a carefully planned military campaign that had been organized under their very noses. Commander Vextar, who had originally captured the humans from the Endeavor, faced execution for his catastrophic failure of judgment. The Korthani leadership needed someone to blame for the impossible situation they found themselves in, and the officer who had brought humans into their empire was the obvious choice. Jake's forces captured 3 Korthani generals and a dozen political leaders during the arena battle. More importantly, they seized control of the facility's weapon stockpiles and communication equipment. The Gladiator Revolt had become the foundation for a legitimate military operation. The freed fighters included specialists from dozens of different worlds, each bringing unique skills and knowledge to the growing rebellion. Under Jake's leadership, they began planning strikes against other Korthani installations while the enemy was still reeling from the initial attacks. Dr. Susan Blake's biological warfare proved devastatingly effective against Korthani troops who had no immunity to human-derived toxins. Entire garrison units surrendered rather than face the mysterious plague that was killing their comrades. Not knowing they were breathing weapons made from human blood, the hospital became a fortress where Susan trained other species in the production and deployment of biological agents. Her medical knowledge had been transformed into military expertise that gave the rebellion an unexpected advantage over technologically superior enemies. By the end of the first day, the scattered slave revolts had evolved into something the Korthani Empire had never faced before. These were not desperate uprisings doomed to quick failure, but coordinated military operations led by a species that understood warfare in ways their captors could not comprehend. The humans had proven that they were not just survivors but natural leaders who could unite former enemies and turn weakness into strength. The Korthani had wanted slaves to work in their mines and die in their arenas, but instead they had awakened something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. 2 years after the initial capture, Jake Martinez commanded a fleet of 30 captured and retrofitted Korthani vessels from the bridge of his flagship Liberation. The former research captain now wore the armor of a military commander, his face marked by scars from countless battles against his former captors. The rebellion had grown beyond anyone's wildest expectations. What began as desperate revolts had evolved into a coordinated military campaign that controlled significant territory across multiple star systems. Jake's strategic genius, learned in the gladiatorial arenas, now orchestrated fleet movements that consistently outmaneuvered the Korthani Navy. His latest target was a major supply depot that fed Korthani operations in 3 neighboring systems. Intelligence provided by Danny Rodriguez indicated that the facility was lightly defended because the aliens never deemed us expected rebels to strike so deep into their territory. Jake studied the tactical display, while his bridge crew prepared for battle. His officers included beings from a dozen different worlds, all united by their hatred of Korthani oppression and their respect for human leadership. They had learned to fight as a coordinated force that was far more effective than the sum of its parts. The attack began with Lisa Harper's engineering teams infiltrating the depot's automated defense systems. Working from hidden bases established in captured facilities, her technical specialists had become masters at turning Korthani technology against its creators. Lisa's innovations combined the best features of multiple alien technologies with human creative thinking. Her ships were smaller than traditional Korthani vessels, but they fought in Wolfpack formations that exploited every weakness in enemy designs. The depot shields failed just as Jake's fleet emerged from hyperspace. The coordinated strike caught the Korthani garrison completely unprepared, their defensive positions overrun before they could send distress signals to nearby fleet units. Jake led the boarding parties personally, his sword cutting through enemy resistance while his tactical commands coordinated attacks throughout the facility. The Korthani soldiers had never faced enemies who fought with such organized ferocity, and their morale collapsed within hours. Dr. Susan Blake arrived with the medical teams as soon as the facility was secured. Her role had evolved from healer to biological warfare specialist, but she still treated wounded rebels with the same dedication she had shown her original patients aboard the Endeavor. The captured depot revealed intelligence about Korthani military operations across an entire sector. Maps showed the locations of slave camps, military bases, and industrial facilities that could be targeted by future rebel operations. More importantly, they contained lists of enslaved populations from dozens of different worlds. Jake used the facility's communication systems to broadcast another message of hope to enslaved beings throughout the Empire. His words were translated into hundreds of languages by specialists who had joined the rebellion, reaching species the Korthani had conquered centuries ago. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Revolts erupted on worlds that had been peaceful for generations as beings who had accepted their fate suddenly realized that freedom was possible. The rebellion was becoming a pandemic that the Korthani military could not contain. Lisa's engineering teams established manufacturing facilities in the captured depot, converting Korthani industrial equipment to produce weapons and ships for the growing rebel fleet. Her hybrid designs incorporated the best features of multiple alien technologies, creating vessels that were more effective than anything the Empire had seen before. The technical innovations went beyond simple modifications. Lisa's teams were creating entirely new classes of warships designed specifically for rebel tactics. These vessels emphasized speed, stealth, and the ability to operate independently for extended periods. Danny Rodriguez coordinated communications between rebel cells across dozens of star systems, his network now including thousands of operatives working within Korthani facilities. The aliens' own communication networks had become weapons against them, carrying false information and coordinating strikes they could not prevent. The intelligence war was as important as the physical battles. Danny's operatives provided advance warning of Korthani fleet movements while feeding enemy commanders false data that led their forces into carefully prepared ambushes. Dr. Susan Blake's biological warfare program had expanded to include weapons tailored to the physiology of different alien species. Her research teams, working in captured medical facilities, developed agents that could target specific genetic markers while leaving other species unharmed. The biological weapons gave the rebellion a decisive advantage in ground combat. Korthani troops could not fight effectively while wearing full environmental suits, and their morale crumbled when faced with invisible enemies that killed through their own air supply. The Korthani High Command realized they were facing an existential threat when rebel forces captured a major military shipyard in the Tau Ceti system. The facility had been producing warships for 3 centuries, but now its production lines were manufacturing vessels for the enemy. Commander Vex Tar, who had originally captured the humans, was brought before the Supreme Overlord to explain how a simple slave-taking operation had evolved into the greatest crisis in Korthani history. His execution was broadcast throughout the Empire as a warning to other commanders. Jake's fleet had grown to over 200 vessels, ranging from captured Korthani dreadnoughts to improvised fighters built in rebel shipyards. More importantly, his forces included specialists from nearly every species the Empire had enslaved, creating a diversity of skills and knowledge that no single civilization could match. The rebels fought with a coordination that amazed even veteran Korthani officers. Species that had been traditional enemies worked together seamlessly under human leadership, their combined abilities creating tactical advantages that individual groups could never achieve. Lisa's latest innovation was a new class of stealth ship that could penetrate deep into Korthani territory without detection. These vessels carried special operations teams trained in sabotage and assassination, spreading terror throughout the Empire's core systems. The stealth ships targeted Korthani industrial facilities, communication networks, and government installations. Their hidden-run attacks created the impression that the rebellion had agents everywhere, undermining confidence in the Empire's ability to protect its own territory. Susan Blake's medical teams had become crucial for treating the diverse alien species that made up the rebel forces. Her research into comparative biology allowed her to develop treatments that worked across multiple physiologies, something the specialized Korthani medical system could not match. The rebellion's medical advantage extended beyond treating wounded fighters. Susan's teams could keep diverse species healthy and combat effective under conditions that would have decimated conventional armies, giving Jake's forces unprecedented operational endurance. Danny's communication network reached into the heart of the Korthani government, providing intelligence about political decisions before they were implemented. The rebels often knew about enemy operations before the field commanders, who were supposed to execute them. The information war had turned the Empire's own bureaucracy against itself. Korthani officials could not trust their communications or their subordinates, creating paralysis at the highest levels of government just when decisive action was most needed. Jake stood on the bridge of the Liberation and studied reports from rebel cells across the galaxy. The revolution had reached a tipping point where success seemed possible, but he knew the most difficult battles still lay ahead. The next phase would require striking at the heart of the Korthani Empire, challenging their control of the core, worlds that had remained unconquered for millennia. It would be the ultimate test of whether humans could lead a diverse coalition to victory against seemingly impossible odds. 3 years after their enslavement began, Jake Martinez led the largest fleet in rebel history toward Corvash Prime, the Korthani homeworld. 500 ships of every size and design followed the Liberation through hyperspace, carrying warriors from 40 different species, united under human command. The final assault represented everything the rebellion had learned about warfare, technology, and leadership. Jake's tactical innovations, Lisa's engineering genius, Danny's intelligence networks, and Susan's biological weapons would all be tested against the most heavily defended world in the galaxy. The Korthani homeworld bristled with defensive installations built over thousands of years of conquest. Massive orbital platforms surrounded the planet like artificial moons, each one capable of destroying entire fleets. The Empire had never imagined these defenses would be needed, but now they represented the last barrier between civilization and chaos. Jake stood on his bridge surrounded by officers whose species had been enemies for centuries. before human leadership taught them to work together. Thrak commanded the heavy assault ships, while Yila led the stealth squadrons that would infiltrate enemy defenses. Zephyr coordinated the technical warfare teams, and Korik managed logistics for the diverse fleet. The battle began with Lisa, Harper's engineering teams launching cyber attacks against the orbital platforms. Working from hidden bases throughout the system, her specialists had spent months mapping the defensive networks and identifying critical weaknesses in Korthony technology. The aliens had built their defenses assuming that attackers would use conventional military tactics. They never anticipated enemies who could reprogram their own weapon systems or turn their automated defenses against each other. Lisa's innovations exploited every oversight in designs that had remained unchanged. For centuries, one by one, the orbital platforms went dark as their control systems were compromised. Some turned their weapons on neighboring installations, while others simply shut down as their power grids were sabotaged from within. The impenetrable defensive network became a liability as confused Korthony operators tried to regain control. Jake's fleet struck during the chaos, using the disabled platforms as cover while they approached the planet's surface. His ships fought in the coordinated Wolfpack formations that had proven so effective against rigid Korthony military doctrine, each group supporting the others while exploiting gaps in enemy coverage. The space battle revealed the full evolution of rebel tactics over 3 years of constant warfare. Jake's forces moved with a precision that amazed even their enemies, anticipating Korthony responses and countering them before the aliens could react. Human strategic thinking had transformed a collection of escaped slaves into a military force that could challenge an empire. Dr. Susan Blake coordinated the biological warfare assault from her medical command ship. Her teams released concentrated toxins into the planet's atmosphere using modified cargo vessels that appeared to be simple supply ships. The Korthony population centers began experiencing mysterious outbreaks that their medical system could not explain or treat. The biological attack was precisely targeted to affect only Korthony physiology, leaving other species unharmed. Enslaved beings throughout the planet realized they were being liberated rather than exterminated, and many began actively assisting the rebel forces. Danny Rodriguez managed communications for the entire operation from a captured Korthony command ship. His network had grown to include operatives within the planetary government itself, providing real-time intelligence about enemy responses and defensive preparations. The information warfare had reached its ultimate expression. Danny's operatives fed false orders to Korthony military units while providing accurate targeting data to rebel forces. The Empire's own communication systems had become weapons that turned their organizational advantages into fatal weaknesses. Ground assault began when Jake's troops landed near the planetary capital. The former research captain led his warriors through the streets of a city that had never known defeat, his sword cutting down enemies who could not comprehend how their perfect empire was crumbling around them. The Korthony civilian population fled in terror as beings they had considered inferior animals demonstrated military capabilities that exceeded their own. Centuries of superiority complex collapsed in hours as the rebels systematically captured government buildings and military installations. Jake fought his way to the Supreme Overlord's palace, where the Empire's ultimate ruler waited with his personal guard. The final battle was broadcast across the galaxy by Danny's communication network, showing enslaved beings everywhere that their oppressors could be defeated. The Supreme Overlord was an ancient Korthony who had ruled the Empire for over 2 centuries. He faced Jake in single combat, confident that his superior size and strength would triumph over human cunning. The alien ruler had never lost a personal fight and could not imagine defeat at the hands of a former slave. Jake's victory was swift and brutal. The gladiatorial skills he had learned in the fighting pit served him well against an opponent who relied on raw power rather than tactical thinking. The Supreme Overlord died with Jake's sword in his heart, his final expression showing complete bewilderment at his defeat. The fall of the Corthony. Government-triggered planet-wide surrender as military units laid down their weapons rather than face the mysterious plague that was killing their comrades. The empire that had dominated the galaxy for millennia ceased to exist in a single day. Lisa Harper established new manufacturing facilities and captured Corthony shipyards, beginning production of vessels designed for exploration and peaceful contact rather than conquest. Her engineering teams worked with specialists from dozens of worlds to create technologies that would benefit all species rather than enslaving them. Liberation became the flagship of a new organization called the Free Systems Alliance, a democratic coalition of liberated species with humans serving as military advisors and strategic planners. Jake accepted the position of Supreme Admiral, but insisted that political leadership should be shared among all member species. Dr. Susan Blake founded the Alliance Medical Corps, an organization dedicated to healing the damage caused by centuries of Corthony oppression. Her research teams worked to cure diseases, repair genetic damage, and provide medical care to beings whose civilizations had been destroyed by the Empire. Danny Rodriguez became the Alliance Communications Director, using his networks to establish peaceful contact with isolated civilizations and coordinate relief efforts across hundreds of worlds. His translation skills proved crucial for building understanding between species that had been kept separated by their former oppressors. The former Corthony homeworld was renamed Haven and became the capital of the new alliance. The planet's resources were dedicated to supporting liberation efforts throughout the galaxy, as fleets of alliance ships carried freedom to enslaved populations on distant worlds. Jake stood in his office overlooking the city that had once been the heart of galactic oppression. Through the windows he could see beings from dozens of different worlds working together to build something better than what they had destroyed. A communication signal reached his desk, carried by the same deep space networks that had once served the Corthony Empire. The message was from Earth, sent by a rescue fleet that had finally traced the Endeavor's last known position. They were coming to save the research ship's crew, not knowing that those same people had already saved the galaxy. Jake smiled as he prepared his response. The rescue ships would find not victims needing salvation, but conquerors who had turned an empire's strength against itself and forged a new galactic order built on freedom and cooperation. The message he sent was simple but carried the weight of everything humanity had accomplished since their capture. The research vessel Endeavor was gone, destroyed in the first battle of the rebellion. But its crew had survived and thrived, proving that humans were not just another species to be enslaved, but natural leaders who could unite the galaxy against tyranny. The Corthony Empire had wanted slaves to work in their mines and die in their arenas for entertainment. Instead, they had awakened humanity's warrior spirit and discovered that some species could not be broken, only made stronger by adversity. The galaxy was free, and humans had shown that even the mightiest empire could fall when confronted by beings who refused to accept defeat. The age of slavery was ending, replaced by an alliance of equals working together toward a better future for all.